I work at Talk, and I also the committer of Apache Aries. There are some contacts if you want to reach me after the conference, and for example, write me some message about this talk. And today I would like to talk with you about from where Spring gets these beans, how they create them, and how we can find them and use in our Spring applications. Okay, let's start with the Spring context. What is Spring context? Spring context is the IOC container created by Spring, and it creates beans, creates it based on some configuration, and configure these beans, of course, and assembly the beans into bigger ones. It's based on the configuration written in XML or in code written in Java, Groovy, or even with our annotation, any JDD language. But if we look on Spring context, this is a big bag of beans. So let's imagine we have created application context using no matter in this moment how, but we have created it, and we could get the bean, for example, person service from this context. And probably no one from us are using it in some way, but we could create it on our own. And with application context, we could do a lot of things. For example, we could get this bean, get all the definition of beans in various ways. And this is the first way to debug our application. So we could get bean names for type, for example, object class, and we could check what we have in our Spring context, what Spring created for us. And when we start with the empty Spring container without any bean defined, we'll end with some built-in beans. For example, we have environment, some beans connected with the properties, some beans which is related with the message sources, so it's very helpful for doing some internationalization. We could send and receive events from Spring, and do something, for example, with the lifecycle of Spring beans. But there are a lot more beans. So we, for example, could see the beans with name starting with the internal, and we could see that probably we shouldn't use it, but we can, because this big bag of beans don't have any public or private things. Everything is public, everything we can read, everything we can use. We shouldn't, but we can. Okay, let's come back to the creating Spring context. If you remember, I remember, for example, Spring 2.5. In this Spring, for example, it was one of the last Spring versions in which we have created the beans using the beans XML by default. Yeah. In newer version, you are using better way, more explicit way to create beans. But of course, we still could define beans in an XML file. And of course, using the specific, for example, class path XML application context, we could create our application context using this being defined in XML file. We can also use the DSL written in Groovy, and in the same way, using specific application context, we can create it. Currently, the most popular way to create the Spring beans are using is the way of using the configuration and annotation. For example, here we have a configuration, and we create beans inside in this configuration. And using this configuration, of course, we use the annotation config application context and create our application context. We are passing only one config, but we of course could pass a lot of them, and our Spring context will be combination of all these configurations. The other way of creating such things from this configuration is by passing the package. And passing the package means that we want to have a component scan of this package. And what is component scan? Component scan, we often use it as an annotation. So for example, we have application context here, and we have a component scan annotation on it. Without any parameter, it means that we want to check the current package. It means that we want to check DPR, for example, component scan, and all the nested packages, and search for the beans annotated with the specific annotation which Spring knows how to interpret. Component scan annotation allows us to do another things. For example, we could define if the beans created with the component scan will be lazy or not. By default, they are not. We can override also the name generator. So we could, by default, all the strings generated from annotation are created as a simple name of the class with the lowercase first letter. We can override this and, for example, use some name with underscores or adding some other stuff to this. We could also exclude some classes using the class names or using some filters by name of this class. And of course, we need the annotated classes to do the component scan. So let's define some beans using the annotations. First, we have the configuration. It's the most obvious way where we put the bean annotated method inside this configuration. We could, of course, create the components, which is just a normal bean without any specified role in our application. For example, person validator. We could also have the person service, which is a service, and it means that it is a service, whatever it means, in the service layer. We could also have the repositories, and this is repositories in the according to the domain-specific design. There should be a methods like save, find, and something similar. And the additional thing that we received from the repository is that all the methods which throw the runtime exception, all the exceptions will be rethrown as a data access exception. We have also the controllers. If you have MVC application, you can create your bean with the controller and expose the MVC methods from here. Currently, we are not using the MVC so widely. So we are using more the REST controllers, where we could expose the REST methods from our Spring container. Another type of bean that we could create in our Spring context are the Spring data repositories. We have some storage agnostic methods, like storage agnostic interfaces, like repository, root repository, paging and sorting repository, and they are basic interfaces for our repositories. We could be more specific if we know what type of storage we have under the hood. So, for example, we could have Mongo repository or JPA repository. But the common themes for all these repositories that I have shown is that all of them are annotated with no repository bean annotation. And it's designed for Spring to not create the repository bean from this interface. So, to create such a repository, we have to override, to extend these repositories. For example, we create person repository, which extends root repository, and Spring for us should create such bean with all these methods that are defined in the root repository, and we receive such proxy where we can access the database, the specific database that is under the hood. But what database is under the hood? How to select what type of database we want to have? We have specific annotations like enable something repositories. We have a lot of them for each Spring data project. And for example, we choose that we want to have the Mongo repositories. Okay, all the repositories now will be created as a Mongo repository. But there is sometimes a problem when we have the polyglots persistence, or we have maybe we are migrating from one database to another. So we could have to define that, for example, adapter JPA is there are the JPA repositories, and in adapter Mongo we have Mongo repositories, and it's perfect to define in our Spring annotations. Another type of beans that we could find in our Spring context are the configuration properties. Let's imagine that we have a credential properties file, which we define the specific prefix credentials and all the keys for these properties. Next, we define the class, for example, credential properties, client ID, client secret. we define the credentials properties on top of it with the prefix credentials, and tell Spring on the on the configuration class that we have property source. We should use the credential properties. Of course, if you have the Spring Boot application, probably don't have it because you are taking all the properties from the application YAML or application properties. You also have to add enable configuration properties and describe what what properties should be defined, should be created in our Spring context. But there is easier way to do this, because a lot of this annotation we could define on one of our beans. So we could create our credentials properties and add the property source and configuration properties on this, and also add the component annotation. Next, the only thing we have to do on our app config is to enable configuration properties, and Spring will take care of all these configuration properties that we can define as a component. When we have a lot of configuration, for example, we have configuration A and we have configuration E. They are combined in one big Spring context when they are, for example, specified in the constructor or specified in the by the component scan that we want to scan these packages which contain these classes. But there is sometimes a problem that we don't have a configuration on top of our class, or for example, the configuration class is outside of our scanning packages. So here we have some external config with some beans, and we want to inject it to our context. For that, we should use the import annotation and pass the name, the full qualified name of our class with the configuration. Of course, instead of that, we could use also the import resource and import resources from the beans written in XML or in Ruby files. So that is in an easier way. We could create our own annotation, for example, enable my feature, and put import my configuration on top of it. And then the only thing we have to do is to enable my feature on our configuration class, and all the imported things will be imported to this configuration. Okay. Next thing, we often create Spring Boot application. We often also have some kind of templating engine to create the application in our organizations. If not, we are often using also the Start Spring IO webpage. If we create Spring application using this webpage, it will result in the, for example, such main class. And the most important thing in this is the annotation, Spring Boot application. If we take a look what is it in it, we'll see that it has such parameters like exclude, we don't know what will be excluded, and we have some scan packages. So it looks very similar how component scan look like. So if we go deeper, we will see that we have Spring Boot configuration. Spring Boot application is a combination of Spring Boot configuration, enable auto configuration, and component scan with some specified filters. Spring Boot configuration is just normal configuration class, but it's specified on this Spring Boot application, and it should be only one in our application. Thanks to that, we could define our beans inside our Spring Boot application. It's very convenient, for example, when you are preparing some demos or some live coding. We also have the component scan, where the component scans from the Spring Boot application will be passed, but also we have some excludes defined. And for example, we find that we don't want to have scan on the auto configurations. And we have also the place where the magic Spring occurs, and this is the enable auto configuration, and the whole auto configuration mechanism. Enable auto configuration has parameters. For example, we can exclude something, and now we see the parameters that to which Spring Boot application pass its arguments, and there are exclude of the auto configurations from our applications. Auto configuration, how it works, what it is. It means put this auto configuration on the class path, and I will create beans for you and nothing more. You only have to put me on the class path. And auto configuration is defined, the good auto configuration is defined in such a way that it is so intelligent that it checks. For example, you have created a bean, I don't have to. I will create only the bean that you need, that are missing in your Spring context. What is also very important, all the auto configuration mechanism occurs after our defined configuration. So first Spring will read all the configuration written defined by component scan, and next when we have built the initial Spring context, it will add all the auto configurations to our Spring context. So how does it work? Let's create our own auto configuration. At the beginning, we create normal configuration class. We shouldn't use component scan annotation on top of it, because component scan should be used only by the application. And we have the auto configuration in most cases are written as a library and a part of library, so it shouldn't do any component scanning. Instead of component scan, we should define the imports on our own and explicitly tell all the other configurations that are needed by our auto configuration. When we have created such auto configuration, we should tell the Spring that this is the auto configuration, because in this moment, this is the normal configuration class. We should create meta-inf Spring factories file, in which we put the enable auto configuration full qualified name of this class, of this annotation as a key, and as a value our class full qualified name of our auto configuration class. Of course, we could define more and more of them, and it's done. We have auto configuration. But now it's done auto configuration. It's nothing special. Yeah, it creates build always and always. But we want to create these only when they are needed, when they are not defined already in our scope, or if they only could have been defined. So we have the conditionals, which are very helpful for that. Conditionals by convention looks like that. We have a conditional on something, and we could put it on the configuration class or on the bean inside the configuration class. In some specific cases, we could put it on the components or other beans just on the class, but this is not very convenient, especially when we are not doing component scan in our application. And what are the specific conditionals that we could use? First one, we have conditional on bean, and we could define what should be the annotation on the bean, what should be the name of this bean, of the type of the bean, and if the bean is already defined in the context, then the bean that is annotated with such annotation will also be created. And what is very interesting, all the requirements should be met for this condition to match, but not by the same bean. It could be on the same bean, but it's not necessary. We also have conditional on missing beans, which work in opposite way, and also it should be met when none of the requirements are met, but not on the same bean. It could be on some beans, not one. We have conditional on class, where we could define, okay, if the class is on the class path, then I will create the bean for you. And what is very important, we could use value, which is where we could pass the classes, and because Spring uses ASM, will not load the class if it spots that the class is not on the class path. If you don't know, ASM is a Java bytecode manipulation and analysis framework, and with which we could create beans or create classes in our Spring context or in our applications, even when you use it without Spring, and modify all existing classes that we could access. And there is a problem with that using with the conditional class, because if you define bean without our configuration, we define bean with conditional class, and we create a method myBean which returns myBean. ASM won't help us here, because myBean is the part of this class. It won't be checked because ASM works only on the annotation condition on the class. And to make it work, we should put the myBuild class the conditional on class on our configuration. And in this moment, Spring will check, okay, the whole configuration shouldn't be parsed because we don't have myBean on our class path. So myBean, which is the result of the method annotated by bean, doesn't care us. Another type of conditional is conditional on value on Java. So we could define, okay, I have Java 8 or I have Java 9. It has specific API, specific classes already defined, and we could create Spring aware of this version. We could have also the conditional property. If the property exists or not exists and has a specific value, then the bean will be created. We have a conditional on cloud platform. So, for example, this is the end of Cloud Foundry, Heroku, or SAP. And conditional cloud platform will check that we have specific properties. For example, it could check for specific properties in our properties of our application. If they are defined, then okay, there are Cloud Foundry properties, so I know that this is the Cloud Foundry application. We have a conditional on single candidate, and it works in the same way as in auto-wired annotation. So it has to have only single candidate, and it means that there is only one bean of specific class in our Spring context, or there is a lot of beans of specific classes, or specific class, but only one of them is the primary bean. There is a lot more such conditionals, some conditionals on missing class, on web application, not web application, resources, JDD, depending where you put your application and what you have to check. But the most powerful conditional, in my opinion, is the conditional on expression, where we could define the spell expression in which you can access the whole context that has been already created and check, for example, what is in environment, what beans have been already defined, and so on and so forth. But it's not very convenient to write all our conditions in the spells, because the spells could be long and we have to define it in many places. So we could define our own conditionals using custom conditions. For this, we are creating, for example, my condition, which implements the condition. We have to override method matches, which we can access the context. We can access also the meta type on the annotation, which are on the annotated element. And when we create such condition, we write some matches here. We could pass it to the conditional, and it works as the conditional on subject annotation in any other case. We could put a lot of conditions in such conditionals, and it will be joined by the end logical expression. Of course, we could define our own annotation, conditional on my, for example, annotate with the conditional, and now the only thing we have to do is to put the conditional on my as any other conditional annotation on our, for example, configuration class. But the problem with this condition is that they are not aware of any parameters. It's just simple annotation without anything. So we have to define all the things inside this condition. Sometimes we want to add some parameters to this. So for that, we add the conditional, my condition on our annotation, and we could pass some value here to this condition. And user could define this value when he uses the conditional on my annotation. For that, to use it in our condition, we have access to the annotated type metadata, and here we could get all annotated attributes of specific annotation, which is on our annotated element, and we could access all the attributes that we have created in this annotation, so we could read the value from here. Okay. As an example, we have the profile annotation in Spring. Profile in version below 3.5, I think, I don't remember really. It was used, it was written in a specific way. In the newest Spring versions, it was rewritten to the conditionals. And we can take it as an example for our when we create our own conditionals. For profile annotation, we add the string profiles active property when we are starting jar. We can also add these to this to our application YAM or any other properties. And we could define that this bin will be created only when the profile is prod. Or we could define that when the profile is prod or test. Or we could define that it will work on any profile but not on the prod profile. And it's written in the, as you can see, in the mechanics that you've seen before. When you want to combine some conditions, for example, we put two conditions on our bin. We have condition on bin and condition on web application. In this moment, if both of them are met, then our bin will be created. If one of them is not met, then the whole bin won't be created for us. But they're always concatenated with the logical AND. Sometimes it's not convenient for us. We want to use in another way. So we could define another Boolean logic for such conditions. We could define, for example, that we have my condition in which we define static classes, and it extends all nested conditions. So all the nested conditions should be met to make this condition pass. But for our convenience, we could define that, okay, any of the nested conditions could be matched to the whole condition, and then the whole condition will be met. Or non-nested condition should be matched to my condition to be met. Okay, we have created a lot of such conditionals on our auto configurations, and okay, we are waiting that, for example, the bin was created before, so I don't have to create it in my auto configuration. I can take advantage that this is already created. And for that, we have to know what is the order of auto configuration, in what order they are applied on our configuration. So we have auto configuration order annotations. As an example, we have user configuration at the beginning. This is all the configuration that we have created and will be defined by our component scan. Next, we have first auto configuration, which, for example, defines the data source, and another auto configuration, which, for example, knows how to add JDD template, and so on and so forth. And we want to be aware that auto configuration 2 knows that auto configuration 1 will be created before it, and auto configuration 2 will be created before the auto configuration 3. And we should define that on our auto configuration. For that, we have auto configure after annotation, where we could define the class after which our auto configuration should be applied. We could also, if you don't want to add the dependency to other class, we could add use the name of this class, or of course we could use also auto configure before if you have the opposite direction of dependency in our auto configurations. But it's not very convenient because we have to know what other auto configuration there is in our Spring application, or should be in our Spring application. So we could define the auto configuration order as a number, and Spring will apply all the auto configuration from the lowest number to the highest number. So we could also define the auto configuration order as a highest precedence, which is the integer mean value, and ordered lowest precedence, which is integer max value. Okay, we have created a lot of such auto configurations. We know what is the order in which they are applied, but we sometimes need to debug and check what have been created, what conditionals are applied on our auto configuration, on our Spring application. And for that, we have the conditional debug. We could add ---- debug flag to our Spring application during the startup. We could also define it in the application YAML or in the properties during our test. If we do that in any of this way, we'll end with the conditions evaluation report in our logs. And here we have positive matches, for example. And we will see now that servlet web servlet web server factory auto configuration will be applied because there is a condition on class servlet request. It's on the class path, so I will create this auto configuration for it and apply it for you. And there is a found session scope. Yeah, there is a specific condition written on web application condition which checks it. We also have the negative matches. So, for example, our Spring Boot comes with the Rabbit auto configuration, but we don't have the channel from the RabbitMQ package on our class path. So this auto configuration won't be applied because it just can't. We have also exclusions in which we can find all the auto configurations that have been excluded by the Spring Boot application or enable auto configuration. And we have also the unconditional classes. And unconditional classes are all the auto configurations that don't have any conditionals on top of it. So, for example, configuration properties auto configuration, property placeholder auto configuration, project info auto configuration will be created always in our application. Of course, we could exclude them using the Spring Boot application annotation, but in most cases we just need them and we don't exclude them. Okay, it's the way of debugging, but debugging is not the always good way, especially when you are creating the application. You can want to have the test of your library, which is using heavily the auto configuration. In this moment, it's more convenient to write some tests and check if something is defined in good way in our Spring context or not. And for that, we could create application context runner. It's class provided by Spring with these Spring test probably dependency. And here we could define context runner. In this context runner, we could redefine the class loader and tell, for example, Spring that okay, this is your class path, but you don't have access, for example, to class A, and it's perfect to test if the conditional on class will work in our application. We could add the parent config for this context. Parent context for this context. We could add some properties and check the conditional on property, for example. We could also add some bin on our own by defining all the information to create the bin. Next, we could create pass the configuration classes to our test. We could define the user configuration. That's the configuration that normally will be defined by the component scan annotation. And we could also add the auto configurations, and they will be applied after the user configuration. After this, we have the context. On the context runner, we could run our test. So we are receiving the context, and we can do some assets in the assert.j way. So we write assert.context, and we add the specific method. For example, it has been, it has single bin, it doesn't have been, and a lot more methods here available to check if something is in our context or is not, or is not in our context. We can also when we have tested it, okay, we have created our library, and for our convenience, we could create Spring Boot starter. You probably know what is Spring Boot starter. When you create the application in start Spring.io, you will receive in your grade or POM file all these Spring Boot starters dependencies. So, for example, the core Spring comes with the Spring Boot starter without any suffix. And for example, in our application, we want to have MQP support for sending events via RabbitMQ. We want to have some MongoDB to store some data in the Mongo database. We want to send some emails, and we want to expose some services using the Spring Boot starter web. And if you look deeply inside these dependencies, you will see that this is the combination of three things. Auto configuration classes, which could be a lot in one starter. We also have to define all these auto configurations inside our Spring factories and add the dependencies to our POM XML or build grade file. And in such way, we'll end with the own Spring Boot start. Okay. To summary, in Spring, there is a lot of annotations that are helpful to create our context, to build all the beans in our context. There's a lot of auto configuration that will be applied on our project, and we have to know when the auto configuration will be applied based on the conditions that are on the auto configuration or the beans inside these auto configurations. We also have to know what is the order of this auto configuration, in which order all the annotations will be parsed and will be created in our Spring context. And at the end, we have to know how to test it and how to debug it. If we do it correctly, if we know all these tricks that Spring do during creation of our Spring context, then we could know that this is not the magic. This is the just normal Spring application without anything special in it. Okay, that's all for me. If you have any questions, then you can ask me. If not, then I will be here probably end of this day. There is a question? No? Okay. I have some links. There is not a lot of them, but because I think that docs in Spring is one of the best documentation of Spring is one of the best documentation I have ever seen, I have ever read. And if something is not easy to find in the Spring documentation, because you have to, for example, check a lot of annotations and check how their conditions are defined and what is all the Java logs for these configurations. Spring is open source, so you can check the Spring project on GitHub and check how they are using, for example, profile annotation and profile, how they define the profile conditions and how we use them, how combine the bigger conditions, for example, in our application. Okay, thank you very much.